Since this is the Southwark Festival of Words, I thought maybe I hadn't talked enough about language in terms of cooking on both sides of the Atlantic. And since the wording for lots of ingredients and procedures can be quite different, it was a real challenge when we first moved here for me to be fluent in both English, and American English. So actually in the introduction to my cookbook, I have a section called Some Notes About Cooking in Britain and America, and I thought I would read it to you. Measurements. The first thing you will notice about recipes written in the UK is that they adhere to the metric system of measurements. That is, the British, and in fact everyone but Americans, use grams instead of ounces, liters instead of quarts, kilograms instead of pounds. But lurking under this seemingly simple translation is a far more complex and maddening issue of volume. Americans like to put things in containers and take them out again. But what is a cup of grated cheese? How tightly packed is it? And what about the fact that Parmesan cheese is much lighter than, say, cheddar? And don't get me started on the fact that Americans measure dry things in one kind of a cup and wet things in another. Growing up there, it all seemed to make perfect sense. But once I've gone out into the world, I realize how quixotic American measuring methods really are. Somehow generations of great American cooks have thrived with instructions like a cup of brown sugar packed, or 2 cups of spinach loosely packed. Americans measure butter by the stick because this is how it comes, quaintly, in the supermarket in a box of 4 sticks. But they all know that a stick of butter weighs a half a cup, and that means 4 ounces. Therefore, I've been sensible in this book and indicated measurements in ounces where it's easy for American cups to do this calculation, and I've retained cups when it makes sense to me to do so. I feel a bit amphibious in this matter because I respect the accuracy of weighing ingredients on my British scale, but something American in me makes me reach for a nice Pyrex cup when it's time to measure. The truth is that for most of my kind of recipes, measurements are only broad guidelines. The exception to this is desserts, which make me so nervous that I always measure exactly, and perhaps you should too. Naming things. Winston Churchill famously observed that America and Britain are 2 peoples separated by a common language. Nowhere is this more evident than in the world of food. A tiny example. I once sent my husband to the greengrocer in London to buy endive. I pronounced this in the proper American way, endive, butchering the original French. He called up, "They don't have any." I said, "Try endive." No luck, he reported. "How about chicory?" I suggested. There was a pause. Got it. Here I give you some translations that will be helpful in my recipes. Naming vegetables. I love cilantro, which word Americans use because of our proximity to Mexico. To get cilantro in Britain, you must ask for coriander, which harkens back to Old French. In British cooking, coriander seed, often ready ground, are a more popular seasoning than in America because of coriander's place in Indian cooking. Many food terms in Britain do arise from French. Courgettes are what the British call zucchini, remember in the gazpacho recipe? And aubergines are eggplants. Arugula in America is supposed to be the same thing as rocket in Britain, and it looks similar and can be used interchangeably in my recipes. However, Americans' palate don't like the same level of bitterness in their lettuce leaves that the British and French do, and so arugula has been bred to be much more benign than rocket, which is quite peppery. I miss rocket when I'm in America. Americans cook with scallions, and the British cook with spring onions, and they're the same thing. Shallots are the same thing too, but the British pronounce them like the lady of, shallot, where Americans place the emphasis on the first syllable, shallot. Fruits and vegetables in Britain often come in small boxes called punnets. I love that word. And while there is no standard measurement for the quantity of anything in them, we all feel we know what amount is contained in a punnet of mushrooms. Naming meat. What Americans call tenderloin steaks are in Britain called fillet steaks. And because of the complicated relationship between Britain and France, the T, which is silent in America, filet, is pronounced firmly in Britain, fillet. The same for herb, actually. It's not even in this section, but the British actually say herb instead of herb. They don't like the French. Bacon in Britain is, unless specified otherwise, a completely meaty cut of pork that resembles what in America is called Canadian bacon. To get in Britain what Americans think of as bacon, one must ask for streaky bacon. Do you know why? Because it is. It's streaky. Bacon comes in slices called rashers. Baking terms. Recipes in Britain that call for castor sugar can be made without a problem in America with granulated sugar, but castor sugar's texture is closer to American superfine sugar. For my recipes, there's no important difference. Baking soda in America is called bicarbonate of soda in Britain. All-purpose flour in America is plain flour in Britain, meaning that leavening of some kind must be added in both countries. Cake flour in America is more finely milled than plain flour, but British plain flour is already more finely milled than American plain flour, so no adjustments need necessarily be made in the UK when an American recipe calls for cake flour. If you feel concerned, however, 2 tablespoons of corn flour, which is called cornstarch in America, may be added to each cup of plain flour to further simulate cake flour. Dairy. British cream comes in several levels of fat content, as cream does in America. American half and half contains the lowest level of fat in any of the 2 countries' cream products, about 14%. Slightly richer than this are British single cream and American light cream, which are interchangeable in my recipes. Even richer, as the names imply, are British whipping cream and American whipping cream, which are interchangeable in my recipes. Still fattier is American heavy whipping cream, and the fattiest, and therefore most delicious, obviously, of all is British double cream. These last 2 are interchangeable in my recipes. The Americans have sour cream, and the British have soured cream, because that's what they did. They soured it. They're interchangeable in my recipes. However, the British version is higher in fat content, and therefore I tend to use half-fat soured cream in my sauces to avoid a puddle of fat on the surface, something that doesn't bother me, but it might bother my guests. Because of its proximity to France, British grocery stores nearly always contain something called crème fraîche, which is similar to American sour cream, though less sour. They can be used interchangeably in my recipes, and crème fraîche is beginning to appear in American shops these days. Thickest of all, as the name suggests, is British clotted cream, which traditionally comes from Devonshire and is used exclusively in sweet dishes. I'm very lucky to have the chance to cook in both these countries, and I appreciate the different charms and strengths of each place. When I come home to America, though, what I crave is the familiarity of summertime treats like big, juicy tomatoes, dozens and dozens of ears of corn on the cob, called sweet corn in Britain. I think that's to distinguish it from the corn that they feed cows. And fresh Maine lobsters, recently so plentiful in America that they're cheaper than most meats. My daughter longs all year long for the giant half-sour dill pickles to be had in America, and when I arrive, I run straight to the deli counter at the supermarket to pick them up and to buy thin-sliced, rare roast beef and white American cheese, which comes in long, creamy slabs and is sliced for me on the spot. Gone at that moment is my interest in the exotic Italian pancettas and triple creme goat cheeses of Europe, until we go back home to Britain. Thanks. Bye all.